Good morning, everyone, to day 2 of Not Optional. I'm Michael Stothard. I'm the editor of Sifted. So yesterday was a fantastic day at the event, as we've just seen from the highlight reel. But for those who missed it, I'm just going to do a quick 3-minute recap on some of the highlights. We had some breaking news, very excitingly. We had Jörg Kukis from the German Finance Ministry saying that the German stock option policy will be published in the coming days, something that entrepreneurs and Not Optional have been fighting for many years. So that's a big victory. We also heard from the Commission that the Startups Nation Standard will be launched during the Portuguese presidency next year of the Council, helping member states deliver startup-friendly policies. We also heard from the founders of TransferWise and Stripe on the great regulatory landscape for fintechs in Europe and how maybe that can be extended to other sectors. And we also had Neil Reimer and Konstantin Van Orange about the sheer ambition of European founders at the moment and how that has really escalated in the last few years. So it was a fantastic day. And today is going to be no less exciting. We're going to explore what it will take to get more IPOs in Europe, which is a huge issue. And we're going to be hear from the Portuguese and the French governments about their plans for making Europe the most entrepreneurial continent. So without further ado, we'll go to the first panel, which is absolutely super. The topic is unlocking investment in startups and the role of government. And what we're going to be trying to do is tease out some of the ways in which our panelists, who I'll introduce in a second, think that governments could be doing more to stimulate investment in Europe. So on our extremely esteemed panel, we have Reshma Sohoni, the founder of Seedcamp. We have Johannes Reck, the founder of GetYourGuide. And we have, I'm afraid there was a last minute change. Jean-David Malo from the EIC couldn't make it due to personal reasons, but Stefan Wecki from the EIC has manfully stepped in to replace him. So thank you very much to the panel. And I'm going to start with Johannes, who's representing the founders here as a founder of GetYourGuide. I'm going to just ask, what, as a founder, as a very successful founder, what do you want from governments? And what do you think governments in Europe need to be doing better to create, to stimulate funding in Europe?
Hi, Michael. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the Not Optional panel today. My name is Johannes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of GetYourGuide. We're the world's largest marketplace for travel experiences. We raised around 600 million euros to date, and we've been around for more than 10 years now. So I have a pretty good historic view of how the landscape came along. I would like to outline 3 points that I think are incredibly important to stimulating the European startup ecosystem over the next 10 years. And let me start by saying that I couldn't be more excited about the next decade. Berlin, where I'm from, has transformed massively due to tech. We're a different city, and we're a much better city today because of technology and technology investment. And I think that is a fantastic role model for a lot of other cities in Europe. The 3 most important things that I see for us right now in Europe is, number 1, investment. So there are a lot of voices today that say, Europe already has a lot of capital. Capital is available for founders. And that is absolutely correct. It's a lot more abundant than where it was 10 years ago. But bear in mind, 10 years ago, no one could raise a round. Today, a couple of good companies can raise a round, but in a lot of sectors, you still have really subdued funding and a lot of cash constraint. And even if you go to the later rounds, GetYourGuide announced a 114 million euro convertible note yesterday. I can tell you we were again talking to 10 US investors in this round and not a single European one, because I couldn't even name a European investor who could cut a convertible check at that size. And I think we're losing out massively. We're losing out massively for our startups who want to raise this capital and who should remain in European ownership and not go into American ownership. But we're also losing out on the side of the European pension funds, of the European insurances, who are all currently regulated in a way that they cannot even participate for the most part in these type of funds. And I think that is a vacuum that needs to be filled, and that is a problem that needs to be addressed. Second is talent. Not Optional was founded as an initiative, because of the lack of our frameworks that we have around incentivizing young people or even old people to join startups. And the time is now. I mean, if you think about COVID-19, we're seeing a dramatically accelerated shift towards digital, and we must incentivize these new jobs, with the right incentives. And the right incentives are shares, the right incentives are options, and we need frameworks and fair taxation that is competitive across Europe, ideally in a harmonized way. And my last point is around regulation. We have allowed large US tech companies to dominate Europe, and they take by far the largest share in all of the basic infrastructure, whether that is cloud computing, a search engine, whether that is app stores. And that makes it very hard for young companies like GetYourGuide or like Spotify to compete on an even and equitable basis. And we need to come up with much faster and better regulatory frameworks to ensure that there is an even level playing field, that whether I'm Google Travel or Apple Music, I actually compete on fair and the same terms against a Spotify or against a GetYourGuide. And I think that is something that will be increasingly important as the coronavirus has concentrated even more power around a couple of tech companies that still remain unregulated in the US and remain unregulated in Europe.
Thanks, Johannes. Stefan, what do you think of those 3 points? And do you agree that those are some of the weaknesses of Europe that need to be addressed, and indeed possibly are being addressed by the Commission at the moment?
Yes, good morning. I think indeed on the first point on investment, which is basically my area of focus, I would say this is what the whole logic of creating the AIC and upping our game in terms of our interventions when it comes to support to funds has been taking place. I mean, just to give you a bit of an idea of the gap that still exists today, in spite of the ground that has been covered over the past 10, 15 years. In 2019, the US venture capital market was about $56 billion, when in Europe, in the EU, we raised 11.2 billion euros. So this basically fivefold, the gap between America and Europe continues to be, I would say, one of the reasons why this investment gap continues to exist, and why it is so difficult for rounds to find the necessary capital in Europe to be raised. And this is where we believe is the major role that the Commission can actually play in order to try to plug that gap. The idea here is, of course, not to crowd out the private sector. On the contrary, is to try to put in place a scheme that will crowd in the private sector by intervening at a moment when the risk level perceived by the market is so high that there is very, very few takers on the market to actually put money in those companies. And the idea here is to try, by putting our money first, by putting down patient capital and using financial structures or instruments and so on, to crowd in private investors, either from the outset when we enter into those companies, or later, since we will also support companies with the necessary grant money to de-risk some of their research and development costs that they still are encountering at the beginning of their lives. So this is basically what we do. Another aspect, of course, of this investment gap is, of course, that the investment gap has also a qualitative aspect. I think it is not often highlighted, but this is something we are very, very concerned about in the European Commission, in the EIC, since we believe that the fact that there is a lack of capital in the VC market in comparison to the US, for example, create a bias towards low risk investment. And when you have, I would say, a much more liquid market with a lot more risk takers, a lot more capital around, you have a lot more risk takers. And as a consequence, you have, I would say, more bets that are being put on high risk, game changing ideas that push from technology from the lab to the market, even in areas that appear to be rather long shots. And that we see that in the US, we see that also in other geographies, like for example Israel, when you have a very vibrant VC market. But this is very difficult to see in Europe, and this is where we believe we can make a particular contribution also by concentrating and focusing our money in that particular segment of the market, when we can help this game-changing, high-risk idea emerge and get the necessary funding in order for them to demonstrate their worth and demonstrate their value on the market. Of course, none of this can happen if we do not also stimulate the right ecosystems at national and European level. And we need, of course, therefore, to do that, since many initiatives exist at national, regional, municipal level to support innovation programs, to support companies. We need to connect to those instead of trying to replace them out of Brussels. We need to give them the support they need in order to amplify their impact and better connect them across Europe in order to basically leverage their strengths and plug the gaps where they do exist. So this is basically where we see the added value of what we can provide at European level. So it's mostly a quantitative, a qualitative, and a networking impact that we are trying to generate by using the resources of the EIC. Just to give you an idea, we will probably have between 2020 and 2027 at the end of the program, the capacity to put on the market about 3.5 billion to 4 billion euros in venture capital, which is not minor.
Were you, I mean, deploying 3 to 3.5 billion in VC is obviously an enormous number, and shows that the Commission is kind of going on the front foot in terms of investing, and there's this move towards direct investing as well. Could you talk a bit about why this more activist approach has been taken? Because there are lots of different models. Obviously, there's creating just a good framework for venture to exist. There's investing in LPs, there's co-investing, there's direct investing. What was kind of the problem before, and why has there been this shift?
Well, I mean, what we have done, I can speak quite at length about them and what they have actually delivered and what they have actually not delivered. Basically, what we have done over the past 10 years is funds basically entering there as LPs through the European Investment Fund acting as our mandator. This has worked very well, and the EIF has become, I would say, a major funder of the market in Europe. I would say it's present in most of the funds that are emerging in Europe. But what we have not been able to do is to, well, one of the themes that I think we will discuss today is tap, I would say, considerable institutional money to come into the market, which has led to a gap in funding still very much there, in spite of our leverage effect, if you wish, of our interventions alongside existing funds. So we have not managed to break that entry into the institutional money. In particular, when we look at pension funds or insurance companies, they remain extremely shy to enter the market on the VCs. I mean, it's due to a number of reasons. Let's not get into that right now. And we have been trying also to stimulate that through the EIF, for example, by creating the initiative Venture EU, which is a European fund of funds, in order to try to catalyze that money and make the case for entering into the VC market. But this has not played out as well as we had thought. But I mean, like I said, there is a quantitative aspect which is related to how come the market in Europe is so much smaller than in the US, but there is also a qualitative one. And the qualitative one is I would say, the general aversion to risk, which is also connected to the role of this institutional money in Europe, and that we have not been able to fundamentally change, in the sense that the logic, when your skin is in the game, private money is in the game, your perception of risk remains quite punitive when we are talking about the type of game-changing ideas, the kind high technology, high risk type of ideas that are emerging from labs across Europe, where we continue to be very, very good at. Europe produces a lot of research. It's actually on the par with the US, ahead of China still, on what our research networks can actually produce, but we have difficulties to go from the lab to the market, and companies are being created more than in the US, but actually these companies do not have the capacity to scale, and especially at the crucial first stages of development, they lack the necessary high-risk capital available that you find either in America or more and more in China or in certain ecosystems that are more favored. And our interventions have just brought more money to basically to a table in which you have basically the same number of deals that are considered to be investment ready by the market. In other words, one of a consequence of our interventions is that we just have the same companies now equipped with more money thanks to our intervention, chasing the same deals, because everybody ranks the deal in terms of risk exactly the same way on the market. And therefore, we have not managed to shift the discussion here. What DIC is intended to do is to increase the pipeline. So fundamentally, what we are trying to do here is to say, okay, look, instead of giving money to VCs and thanks to this money, you will chase all the same deal with an increased amount of money, which has been what we have been doing before, is to tell them, okay, we are also going to work on increasing the pipeline of companies that you will consider investment ready, because we are ready to come in early, take the high risk at the beginning of the scale-up process, and therefore provide you after some time with, I would say, a greater number of companies in which you will be able to invest. So it does not mean that we will stop doing the interventions that we used to do. So therefore, the indirect type of intervention, we'll continue to do that, but we need to complement it with a direct one in order to increase the pipeline. Otherwise, we do not resolve the problem.
Reshma, as one of the most active European investors out there, is this what Europe needs? Does it need more government money doing direct investments, increasing the pipeline, smaller checks for lots of different companies? Is this positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of two ways of looking at anything government, right? And I think our perspective on it is a more optimistic and working with. So yes, I think it's broadly positive. And I think the key word in what Stefan said at the very beginning and is crowding out, or they want to crowd in. And I think that's it, right? Like I think that's where the private sector gets more up in arms. It's when the private sector feels crowded out, and I think it's sort of well proven what sort of private sort of commercial interests do for the economy and job creation and sort of returns and so forth. So I think if that is the North Star of the government, I think it is, in all our sort of work with them over the past decade plus, then absolutely it's a positive, but it needs to be, it needs to remain that North Star. And I think everything sort of Stefan described, and probably particularly the critique of where VC money goes, I think it's fair, right? A lot of the VC money tends to go, and we're sort of flag bearers of that. In our model is we go where it's easier to commercialize. That's our model, and we don't, we make no apologies of it. And so, we need the help of Stefan and sources of capital like that to help us crowd in when it is possible for our money to come in, given what our parameters and mandates are. Just, I mean, it's interesting with working with government or not. I mean, I think if you look at the US, they've woken up very late to what European entrepreneur community has been doing the last 15 years. Is, I think, we all said sort of 15 years ago or so, we can't, policy will happen, regulation will happen. Either we have a voice in it or we're impacted by it. And so versus I see, because I'm American as well, I see my sort of American friends in the industry just in the last 5 years with clearly what's been happening over there sort of said same thing. Either we sit on the sidelines and we're going to get impacted, and we all have, or we're a voice in it. And so thinking back again, Europe does not have the whole concept of endowments, right? This is math, and we don't talk, I know we talked about pensions, but endowments are massive in America. Universities are money-making businesses. That's what they're. If McDonald's and Starbucks is a real estate company, then universities are, hyper capital making companies, and that just doesn't exist in Europe, right? We think about sort of cost of education differently in the right way, I would say. And then secondly, the pension world doesn't exist. So I mean, sort of 13, 14 years ago when we raised money, it was all private money, but we couldn't scale just on that. And so we said, all right, if endowments don't exist, and American endowments won't necessarily invest in Europe, and pension, all the regulation and other reasons prohibit them, then what? And so we started that dialogue with the European Investment Fund, which has been, an incredible backer, as Stefan said, and will do immensely well. I think they're the largest shareholder in UiPath, for example, because they are LPs in Early Bird, Credo Ventures, and Seedcamp as well. So, and that company is out of Romania, global now. So the EI's done amazing. And we did the same with the British Patient Capital. And we're inspired by the quality of the team and sort of what's coming out of BPI in France as well. So, I think it's a result of that dialogue, right? And not sort of saying there's government, there's entrepreneurs, and the two don't meet. So, at least from our view over the last 15 years, it's been a very positive, constructive dialogue with that North Star in mind, which is how do we crowd in the private sector and not crowd it out. And so I think, to again, sort of the question of direct investing, we worked with the London Co-Investment Fund. Again, it does help. It does help, especially in those very kind of risky bets. My sort of view on what I've seen in the last decade, and with the crowding in also of, Bessemer just announced an office in Europe. Sequoia has already announced an office in Europe. All the sort of battery ventures have had offices in Israel for a while. People in London as well. With all that crowding in, I would say the greatest of companies really have their choice these days, and that wasn't true 10 years ago. And the quantum of the greatest companies in Europe now has increased tenfold. Also in the last 10 years or so. That said, there is the whole pyramid below, literally, below that top section, which we continue to be challenged in helping fund, in helping scale. To Johannes's point, I don't think of it as US ownership or Chinese ownership. I think of it as European benefit. So I don't sort of care who owns things, but who's benefiting. And so we do need pension money to come in. We need, that's why we love crowdfunding. The merger of Crowdcube and Cedars is powerful. I think it's going to be better for Europe, for them to be together. So we think the retail investor, the everyday person, needs much more opportunity to benefit from all the success of Europe.
You talk about crowding out versus crowding in, and Stefan mentioned it as well. But this move towards direct investment, this 3.5 billion figure, I believe they're going to be writing checks of around 500,000 euros to 15 million. It's roughly the same kind of ballpark that Seedcamp is playing in. Is there a worry in your mind as well, that you end up just getting beaten to deals, or just more expensive, or is there a sort of message you'd like to pass to Stefan about how not to crowd out?
Yeah, and I think Stefan sort of mentioned it before already, which is a lot of that co-investing, a lot of the sort of infrastructure, fundamental research in investing that then allows folks like us and downstream to sort of come on top. I mean, there's absolutely a lot of edge cases where we ultimately don't invest because, I have discussions with some of our portfolio companies who are essentially in R&D with us for 3 years, and then they launch. And I'm like, we love you, but we weren't the right people for you, because you got nothing out of what we do, which is all about commercial. Are you ready to sort of be 6 months from launch? Are you ready to be, a max sort of year from launch? And there is incredible sort of depth in healthcare, in hardware, manufacturing, elsewhere, deep tech, which is even deep tech at the software level, which is not ready to launch in 6, 9, 12 months. And so we absolutely need investment help, prior to that. And on top of that, I mean, we can still be writing sort of that 500K check or $1 million check, or alongside us, right, to make some of those edge case investments. So we're not worried. And I think, again, competition is great. Like, I know, as VCs, we don't love it, but we love it as well. It makes you better. And so what we trade on is our network of 400 plus companies and the 1,000 founders that are out there. We trade on, that peer network. They all kind of recycle talent within each other. They sell to each other, buy from each other. We trade on our kind of mentor network and experience network. And I don't think that's where, Stefan and EIC are intending to play, right? So that capital is additive to all of the efforts we can make on the sort of support side.
Johannes, we're talking about, just picking up on some of Stefan and Reshma's points about the kind of models for investment, be it in LPs or co-investing or direct investment. Do you have a take on what Europe should be doing, how helpful a kind of move towards more direct investment is, or do you think they should be stepping back and changing the regulatory landscape, or just focus on changing the regulatory landscape with, pension funds and options? What's your, as an extremely prominent European founder, what do you kind of see and what do you think people want?
Yeah, let me first respond to Reshma. So, don't get me wrong, I'm not a protectionist, but at the same point in time, I think, when GetYourGuide IPOs and we're a European success story, mostly American pension funds and American endowments will benefit from it. And I think that's a pity for Europe, and it shouldn't be that way, right? So I think that is something that we must change in the future. And I hope that the GetYourGuides 10 years from now will benefit European citizens as much as, we are currently benefiting American and Asian citizens. On your question, without getting into the details, let's stick to the high level principles. I think that one of the most important principles is that when you handle money from pension funds, endowments from the European taxpayer, it should be in the hands of professionals. So I am not a big fan of governments making direct investment decisions. I think governments should fund professional funds, and those funds should be many, and they should be in competition with each other. And ultimately, the money should go where good returns are. So I think that is the first principle. The second principle is what we lack is not only a risk-taking culture. On the investment side. That is certainly one that I have seen time and again. So if you look at, the big pots of money, for instance, in Germany, where I come from, the life insurances, the alliances of the world. They have, tiny quotas ultimately for venture capital. And that's certainly also a mindset problem. But more importantly, we don't incentivize these investments from a regulatory point of view. And I think, there is a massive benefit to doing that. Not only do I think will you actually invest in the right assets, because tech assets and innovation will yield much better returns over the next 10 years than if you invest into German companies that produce combustion engines, but also I think you will actually create a digital agenda across Europe, and also a tech agenda across Europe that will probably span multiple sectors, and that will be to the great benefit of the future generation. So as a still relatively young citizen of Europe, if I may call myself, I would be incredibly disappointed in us as a continent if we weren't pursuing these type of investments much more aggressively, because otherwise I do think that we really tarnish the future of our children.
What do you think of that, Stefan? Would you like to respond to that?
Well, I think the regulatory aspect is not something that I work on. So sorry if I cannot really take a strong position on it. But what we have observed is that probably one of the reasons I would say the institutional money, in particular the pension funds, the insurance companies, don't go into VCs, is that there is a perception of the VC to be highly risky and to give out, I would say, very uncertain return. And the name of the game when you are in pension funds or insurance company is the steady, predictable returns that you can get. VC is seen for better and for worse as providing, I would say, okay, a good bet one day, a bad bet another day, and this lack of predictability is creating, I would say, a kind of a shyness on the part of the industry. The second aspect of it is that they don't really have teams in place that can help them develop, I would say, sustained effort of investment in the VC sector that will allow them to actually have, I would say, a steady perspective on the returns that they will be able to get, because they will be able to find out, I would say, the better funds to invest in, and therefore to have this predictability of the returns that is the name of the game. And I think that we need probably to advertise better that the VC market has come of age, and that indeed it is not anymore a lottery. It is actually something on which you can bet for predictable return if you just know, if you put enough resources in it, and if you put enough teams in it in order to be able to help you through it. So I would say that aspect would go, in our view, quite a great deal into addressing that particular issue. Otherwise, yes, I tend to agree. I mean, we are in a situation in which today we tend not only to have our best ideas thrive in another market, but on top of that, we tend to then buy those products that have been basically crossing the Atlantic and coming back to us in another war, in another form. And at the end of the day, Europe loses at both angles. We nurture at the level of research and development those ideas. We nurture at the level of the educational system the people and the talent that actually produces those ideas. And then we get very little return out of it, because when the growth and jobs produced by those ideas are taking place, they are taking place not necessarily in Europe, and more in America or in Asia. And this is, I would say, a major problem for Europe to be in that situation. So what we are trying to do here with DIC, I mean, you talked about the European DARPA and the possibility of trying to address it. I mean, of course, DARPA was conceived over the time of the Cold War. So, I mean, the situation is very different today. But the idea is to try to find a European answer to this particular challenge that is being thrown at us, which is that we want the economy of the 21st century would be fundamentally innovation driven. We are good at producing innovation, at nurturing it, but we are very bad at scaling it up and making it market ready for take up by consumers. And this is where we need to fundamentally start to work. It does not mean that the aspect of developing advanced research needs to be given up. DIC has also an instrument called the Pathfinder that will go and find out those very good ideas based on collaborative projects, or the traditional, I would say, way of bringing together advanced research. But we need to really make a major step up and step up our efforts in order to convert that advanced research into a marketable proposition. And here, to go back on the issue of the crowding in and crowding out, I mean, it was very well summarized. I mean, what we are not going to be able to replace what the commercial VC network can provide, in particular in support to companies, mentoring, soft skills, networking, and so on. We cannot do that. What we need to do is provide the incentives to capture it to the benefit of the company that are considered to be too high risk for the commercial VCs to go in. So in our view, this is, I would say, joining forces operation more than a replacement operation. So by definition, we are there to bring to these companies to the level in which then the commercial VC can make them benefit of whatever all the things that they can offer, that indeed today often they cannot do, because the commercial VC simply don't have the capacity to cover all these ideas in Europe.
Fantastic. Well, I'm afraid half an hour seems very short, but that's all we have time for. I think it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. We've heard from Johannes with the 3 key areas about promoting talent, about regulation and level playing field, but also about stimulating sort of an impassioned argument for stimulating investment by helping pension funds and insurance companies. We have this sense of this seismic shift going on in Europe from you, Stefan, towards direct investing and like being more on the front foot with investing, which is fascinating. And then it was just great to hear Reshma talk about all of these issues, but particularly to be very supportive of this co-investing model, and rather than saying, oh, governments, go away, stop crowding me out, to be really excited about that, which I think is just fantastic. And then the point about pension funds as well, and Stefan, how we needed to advertise to the world, but particularly these funds, that the VC market is not rolling the dice anymore, and it has matured. So my little sum up, but also wanted to thank all three of our guests so much. And I hope everyone listening stays for the rest of the day. There's some fantastic stuff coming up. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.